The black smoke rose like a clenched fist against the Amazon sky. Flames licked the twisted metal remains, while the thick air carried the acrid smell of burnt fuel mixed with something else, something the villagers couldn't identify. Santiago, barely 12, was the first to arrive. His bare feet sank into the damp earth as he cautiously approached the smoking fragments. The silence was strange. Not even the birds sang. Only the crackling of the slowly dying fire and the constant drip of something viscous falling from a broken branch. At the center of the devastation, a black leather suitcase remained intact. Impossible, the boy thought. Everything around it was charred, melted, unrecognizable. But that suitcase seemed to have been protected by some invisible force. His small hands trembled as he touched the cold surface of the leather. He didn't know he was about to open something that would forever change his village's life. He didn't know that the man whose body lay meters away had chosen to die carrying the most valuable secret of his fortune. The wind blew, scattering the ashes. And at that moment, Santiago heard a sound he would never forget. The soft cry of a baby, coming from inside that impossibly intact suitcase. What had begun as a tragedy was about to become the most extraordinary miracle the Amazon rainforest had ever witnessed. Sebastián Vallejo was no ordinary man. At 62, he had built a technology empire that spanned 3 continents, owner of the 3rd largest fortune in South America, a collector of pre-Columbian art, and a globally recognized philanthropist. But he was also a man marked by loneliness and remorse. 3 days before the accident, Sebastián had last visited the offices of his foundation in Bogotá. His personal assistant, Mercedes, found him sitting by the window watching the mountains that surrounded the city. "I want you to cancel all commitments for the week," he told her, without turning to look. "I'm going on one last trip." Mercedes frowned. In 20 years of working for him, she had never seen him so serene, so resigned. "Where to, Mr. Vallejo?" "To where I should have gone 30 years ago," he replied, taking a yellowed photograph from his desk. In it, a young indigenous woman smiled while holding a baby in her arms. "To find my son." The confession struck like lightning. Mercedes knew Sebastián had never married, never officially had children. But there was that photograph, that lost look, that sudden urgency. "Sir, the lawyers have been trying to contact you all week. They say it's urgent to review the will." "The will is already made," he interrupted, putting the photograph in a black leather suitcase. "Everything that matters is in here." Sebastián Vallejo boarded his private jet knowing he would not return. What he didn't know was that his last wish, to find the son he had abandoned, would be fulfilled in the most unexpected way possible. Mercedes Castillo was 45 and had an intuition that had never failed her. She had seen powerful men lie, manipulate, and destroy lives without batting an eye. But Sebastián Vallejo was different. Behind that billionaire's facade, she had discovered a man tormented by a past mistake. It all began 3 months ago when she found a forgotten folder on Sebastián's desk. Inside, handwritten letters that were never sent. Letters addressed to Amara, my lost love, and Santiago, the son I never knew. The letters told a story the world never knew. At 32, Sebastián had worked as an engineer on an oil drilling project in the Amazon. There he met Amara, a young woman from the Ticuna tribe who worked as a translator. They fell in love. She became pregnant. But when family pressures and business commitments called him back to the city, Sebastián made the most cowardly decision of his life. He left without saying goodbye, promising himself he would return when the time was right. That time never came. The company grew, the fortune multiplied, but the emptiness in his heart deepened every year. Mercedes had witnessed Sebastián dedicating millions to environmental projects in the Amazon, how he donated to organizations that protected indigenous communities. It was all a way to compensate for what he could never directly repair. When the jet crashed, Mercedes knew she had to act. She took the first flight to Leticia, carrying the unsent letters and a strong determination to find the family Sebastian had sought too late. He wasn't perfect, she murmured as the plane flew over the endless jungle, but he deserved a second chance. Captain Roberto Mendoza had been investigating plane crashes for 15 years. He had seen it all. Mechanical failures, human error, sabotage, extreme weather conditions. But something about Sebastian Vallejo's jet crash didn't add up. The initial reports were clear. Electrical storm, zero visibility, experienced pilot who made a risky decision trying to land on an emergency runway. Case closed. Accident. End of story. But Roberto couldn't sleep. The black box showed something strange. In the last 5 minutes of the flight, Sebastian had asked the pilot to change course 3 times. Not towards the nearest airport, but towards specific coordinates in the middle of the jungle. As if he was looking for something, or someone. Why would a man worth $3 billion risk his life flying into nowhere? Roberto wondered as he reviewed maps of the crash site. The answer came when he found Sebastian's flight logs from the last 6 months. There had been multiple, all to the Amazon region, all canceled at the last moment. Sebastian had been planning this trip for months, but something always stopped him. Until that night. Roberto called his colleague in Bogota. Do you have Vallejo's medical records? Here they are. Why? The answer chilled him to the bone. Sebastian Vallejo had been diagnosed with terminal cancer 3 months ago. He had weeks to live. My God, Roberto murmured, suddenly understanding the urgency, the desperation in those course changes, the pilot's insistence on trying to land despite the storm. It hadn't been an accident. It had been a farewell mission. Roberto closed the official file, but opened a personal one. He needed to know what had led a dying man to risk everything for one last flight into the jungle. 2 searches began at the same time, neither knowing of the other's existence. Mercedes had arrived in Puerto Nariño with Sebastian's letters and a faded photograph. The Ticuna village closest to the crash site was a 4-hour boat ride up the Amazon River. Every minute that passed, she felt she was getting further from the answers Sebastian had sought for 30 years. Do you know a woman named Amara? She asked every elder she met. The answers were always the same. Gestures of denial, evasive glances, protective silence. Meanwhile, 800 kilometers away, Roberto Mendoza had discovered something that changed everything. Sebastian's private hospital records showed regular visits from a psychologist specializing in family reunions. The doctor had helped Sebastian hire a private investigator. We found the son, the investigator's last report, dated just a week before the accident, said. Santiago Vallejo Ticuna, 29 years old, lives in the community of Palmeras. His mother, Amara, died last year. He doesn't know who his father is. Roberto felt a chill. The investigator's coordinates matched exactly the point where the jet had crashed. Mercedes, unaware of this discovery, finally found an old woman willing to speak. Amara did exist, she told her in broken Spanish. She had a child by the white man. The child grew up here but left when his mother died. He returned recently with his own child. Where is he now? The old woman pointed to the smoke still rising on the horizon. He went to see what fell from the sky. He took the grandson with him. Mercedes and Roberto were converging on the same point without knowing it. One carried unsent love letters. The other, the truth about a mission that had cost 2 lives. At the center of it all, Santiago, father and son, did not know they were about to discover the secret that would change their lives forever. Santiago Ticuna was 29 years old and had his mother's eyes. He had grown up hearing stories about the sky man who had taken Amara's heart, but he never believed it was real. For him, his father was just a shadow, a ghost who had abandoned his pregnant mother. When he saw the smoke rising over the jungle, he took his 12-year-old son and walked 3 hours to the crash site. What he found left him breathless. Among the smoking remains, his young son, who shared his name, held a black leather suitcase. Inside, along with wads of money and legal documents, was something that made Santiago the father stumble. A photograph of his mother holding a baby, and below it a letter with his name written in trembling calligraphy. "My dearest Santiago," he read aloud, as tears rolled down his cheeks. "If you are reading this, it means I finally found the courage I lacked. 30 years ago I am your father, and I'm sorry. I'm more sorry than words can express." The letter continued for pages. Sebastian told him about Amara, about the love he felt for her, about the cowardice that made him flee. He told him about the cancer, about the time running out, about how he had spent a fortune trying to find him. "I don't expect your forgiveness," the letter said. "I just want you to know that not a day went by that I didn't think of you and your mother. Everything I built was for you, even though I never had the courage to give it to you in life." Santiago the son, not fully understanding what was happening, approached his father. "Dad, why are you crying?" Santiago hugged him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of the jungle in his hair. "Because we just met your grandfather, son, and he loved us from far away." At that moment, amidst the ashes of a private jet and the distant chirping of returning birds, 3 generations finally met. Forgiveness came not as words, but as shared tears under the infinite Amazon sky. Roberto Mendoza arrived at the crash site just as Mercedes emerged from the jungle with Santiago and his son. All 3 carried the black leather suitcase, and their eyes were red from tears. "Are you from the Vallejo family?" Roberto asked, showing his air accident investigator ID. Santiago nodded, still processing the revelation. I'm his son." Roberto felt a lump in his throat. "I need you to know something important. Your father didn't die in an accident." The revelations struck like lightning. Roberto showed them the medical reports, the flight logs, the exact coordinates Sebastian had given the pilot. He knew he was going to die. The cancer gave him only a few weeks. This trip was his last chance to find you. Mercedes opened the suitcase completely for the first time. In addition to the letters and money, there were legal documents that chilled them to the bone. Sebastian had transferred his entire fortune to a trust in the name of Santiago Ticuna and descendants, $3 billion. But there was something even more devastating, a video will recorded the night before the flight. "If you are watching this," the grainy image of Sebastian said on the iPad screen, "it means I arrived too late to meet you in person, Santiago. But I want you to know that every business decision I made, every project I funded in the Amazon, was with you and your mother in mind." The irony was cruel. Sebastian had been funding conservation projects less than 50 kilometers from where his son lived for the past 5 years. They had been so close. "The pilot tried to convince me not to fly that night," the video continued. "But I knew that if I didn't go then, I would never go. I prefer to die looking for you than to live another day without trying." Roberto closed the iPad. "Your father died a hero, Santiago, not a coward." In the silence that followed, only the wind rustling the leaves and the suppressed cries of 4 adults could be heard, understanding that some truths arrive when they can no longer change the past, only the future. The news of the accident had arrived in Bogotá like a whisper, but the revelation of the inheritance spread like wildfire. $3 billion in the hands of an indigenous community in the Amazon was unprecedented in Colombia. The lawyers of the firm Vallejo and Asociados met in an emergency session. The will was legally sound, but the implications were enormous. An uneducated indigenous person managing one of the country's largest fortunes, the senior partner murmured. Pressures came from all fronts. The Ministry of Interior wanted the money to go through a government trust. Environmentalists demanded it be used exclusively for conservation. Oil executives saw an opportunity to buy cheap land before Santiago understood its true value. But the final decision rested with Judge Martha Esperanza Rodriguez, who had to validate the will. She was a 60-year-old woman, known for her strictness, but also for her incorruptible sense of justice. Martha had spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing every line of Sebastian's will. DNA tests had confirmed paternity. The documents were in order. Legally, there was no doubt. But the calls didn't stop. The governor, the minister, powerful businessmen, all with suggestions on how to handle the case. "Madam Judge," her secretary told her, "you have a call from the Palacio de Nariño." Martha looked out the window. In the distance, the mountains surrounding Bogotá seemed small compared to the decision she held in her hands. She could delay the process, look for legal technicalities, protect the money from what many considered inexperienced hands. Or she could do what the law required, fulfill the last will of a father who had died seeking redemption. "Tell the president I'm busy," she replied, signing the documents with a firm hand. "And schedule a press conference for tomorrow." Justice, for once, would not yield to the pressures of power. The press conference was held on a Tuesday morning at the Palace of Justice in Bogotá. The media filled the room, waiting to hear about the case of the century, the largest inheritance ever granted to an indigenous community in Colombian history. Judge Martha Esperanza Rodriguez approached the microphone with a firm step. For 40 years she had served the judicial system, but she had never felt the weight of a decision like that morning. "The will of Sebastián Vallejo Mendoza has been fully validated," she announced. "Santiago Ticuna is officially recognized as his universal heir." A murmur ran through the room. Some journalists smiled, others frowned. The cameras focused on Santiago, who had traveled from the Amazon accompanied by Mercedes and Roberto. He wore his traditional Ticuna clothing, seeming small among so many suits and ties. But what came next surprised everyone. Santiago approached the microphone and spoke in slow Spanish with the musical accent of the jungle. "I didn't come here for the money. I came because I wanted to meet the man who was my father." He took out of his bag the yellowed photograph of Amara with the baby in her arms. "My mother taught me that true wealth is not counted in pesos. It is counted in the land you breathe, the water you drink, the children who laugh." The room was in absolute silence. "I accept the inheritance, but not for myself. I accept it for the jungle that my father learned to love too late. Every peso will be used to protect our land, educate our children, and show the world that indigenous people are not poor. We are the guardians of the greatest wealth that exists, life itself." Santiago held up the photograph to the cameras. "This is for you, Dad, and for you, Mom. We are finally together." At that moment, the system had not only decided, it had been transformed by the wisdom of someone who never needed to possess it to change it. 5 years later, the Amara Sebastián Foundation had become the most respected conservation organization in South America. Santiago Ticuna directed projects that had saved 3 million hectares of Amazon rainforest, built 50 bilingual schools, and created a network of medical centers serving 200 indigenous communities. Mercedes Castillo had stayed on, as executive director, fulfilling in life what Sebastián had dreamed of doing. Roberto Mendoza had left accident investigation to document stories of family reunions, inspired by what he had witnessed. Santiago, the son, now 17, studied environmental engineering in Bogotá, but returned every vacation to the jungle where he grew up. On his desk, he kept 2 photographs, one of his great-grandmother Amara with the baby, and a recent one, where he smiles next to his father, planting trees in the exact spot where his grandfather's jet crashed. The black leather suitcase is now exhibited in the Community Museum of Puerto Nariño, as a reminder that true love transcends time and death. But the story of Santiago and Sebastián leaves us with a question that aches the soul. How many fathers die looking for children they never embraced? How many children grow up wondering why they were abandoned, without knowing that someone loved them from a distance? Sebastián Vallejo's last flight did not end in flames. It ended in embraces that came 30 years late, but that continue to resonate in every tree planted, in every child educated, in every hectare of protected jungle. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are born from the most painful mistakes. And you? Do you have a pending reunion that time is silently taking away? Life is too short to postpone love, but it's never too late to try to mend a broken heart.